Therapy is a really specific and unique space. Therapy is a space that's set apart from my life. So I really think about therapy, and I encourage clients that I work with, I want you to think about this office and my voice as an extension of your internal world. So when I have a mentor, it is my internal world coming into contact with somebody else's. And I have to remain aware that you have your own opinions, your own agenda, your hopes for me, you love me, your wants for me, all those things. So I have to remain separate from you. And I have to know that there's going to be a ripple effect. So if I share with you, oh man, I'm really struggling with something, and you idealize me, and I disappoint you, that might have a ripple effect in my life. I have to know that I'm aware of that. And so it impacts the way I move into that space. Therapy is set apart in that it's a professional relationship, even though it's intensely personal, right? Like it's as intimate as you can get. It's professional, which means at the end of the day, part of my job as a person's therapist is to not have any expectations of you. I'm never going to be disappointed in my client. You can't disappoint me. I can be frustrated with you. I can be, I will, of course, I'll have my own personal experience in the therapy process if somebody's struggling or somebody's behaving in a way that's self-destructive or whatever. But a therapist is a highly trained person to say, I'm actually going to remove what we call projection. I'm going to remove my personal agenda from this, and I'm going to hold space to just reflect back so I can see myself in a mirror honestly, which is why, I will always have my own personal therapist.
Everything starts with our thoughts. Thoughts dictate our beliefs, which then dictate the way we treat and view the world, which then becomes our repeated being. And that is our personality, which then is our personal reality.
Welcome back to Food for Thought. I'm Santiago Castro, and we are here today with Dr. Brian. He's a therapist based out here in San Diego with over a decade of experience. He's also a family man. He also has his own practice here, and he's actually a public speaker as well. So I'm super honored, man. Honestly, like for me personally, I've seen you speak on stage at a marriage retreat, at my church personally, and it's been honestly one of the most probably impactful speakers that I've had in a while. Wow. Just because of the way you articulate things. You really bring psychology and biblical principles together, which we'll also get to here in a little bit. But man, it's a huge honor to have you here today. Honestly, man, I love the way you communicate. I love what you're about. So for me, I'm super excited. I'll try to keep it short, but again, like I said earlier, this is a type of topic that I love to like just talk on for hours. So
man, that means the world. I'm truly honored to get to be on here with you. I think what you're doing is truly incredible, man. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, man. Really, for the audience that don't really know you, I really kind of want to get first into your story. Before you were this, really well-known doctor out here in San Diego. What happened, in your past? What made you want to go into therapy? What made you want to kind of like divert into this world? And then just anything you want to share about your past.
Yeah, I tell people I got into therapy because of the gift of catastrophe. Like, I was young. I was kind of a weird kid. I grew up in, really messy home. Two wonderful parents who were doing their best, but they didn't have the tools to provide like a stable kind of environment. And so, my parents have been married several times each, and a lot of kind of explosive rage and a lot of divorce. And so I remember being kind of an odd kid in high school, being like, I don't know what I'm going to do for a living. I don't know how wealthy I'm going to be, but I am going to have a good family. I'm going to be an amazing husband. I'm going to have an amazing marriage. For some reason, I got fixated on. So like my friends are spending their money on like video game systems at 17, 18, 19, and I'm buying marriage books. It was just like a weird thing that was in my blood. And when I got married super young, I was 22, she was 21. We were highly ill-equipped. Some of the worst guidance we ever got was our premarital counselor was this well-intended pastor at this tiny little church up in Tracy, California. He basically said, he interviewed us once or twice, and he said, oh, you guys are good, you don't need more care. So we were like, we're awesome,
Oh, wow.
I'm a really successful, level-headed single person, so this must obviously translate to marriage. And then about 3 years into our marriage, I had all of those coping strategies I was kind of keeping at bay. All those hidden things, they had just come out, and I came right to the brink of shipwrecking my marriage. And it was one of the most life-changing and liberating things I've ever gone through. So I had to bring all of this confession to my wife. I was certain it was over. And that led us into couples therapy, which led me into personal therapy. And my life was changed there. And so I remember towards the end of our treatment, we weren't in crisis anymore. We were starting to get near that place where we were going to terminate with our wonderful therapist, Gina. And I remember saying, I think I might want to do this. But who would come to somebody like me? Like, I almost wrecked mine. And I remember her just saying, "Oh, Brian, like, the fact that you've been through this doesn't disqualify you. This qualifies you to be a better therapist." And that was the beginning. That was about 15, 16 years ago. I was in the middle of a master's degree in education.
Oh, wow.
My wife, unbelievably, just gave me her blessing to start over. I was almost done. She said, "You can leave your master's program, start over, and start a grad program in counseling." And it's been just amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I love how you said that you were very vulnerable about what you went through, and then how that, actually translates into you being a better therapist, and which I think is usually such a better, even within the Christian community, people who tend to have gone through things are always better at giving wisdom in those areas and actually guiding people, because they have from firsthand experience. They know what it's like. They know what it feels like, versus somebody who's more of like a spectator on the outside saying this is what, in theory would be better. Yeah. But when you know what it feels like, those emotions, I feel like it just gives you a better insight, I feel like. So I think that's awesome. I like that for sure. I know a lot of my friends who've gone through, whether it's therapy for personal stuff or marriage, a lot of them, the biggest issue that they tend to say is like, I just feel like, the therapist just never has been through what we've gone through or what I've gone through. So it's a little harder for them to really connect. And I think that's really what kind of makes you stand out. So I like that. I really want to jump into, going into therapy. I want to talk about, for me at least, what I've noticed is, when I was younger, so I'm 24 right now. So when I was in high school, I pretty much would notice that a lot of kids were very like, I think it was an overall cultural thing. Everybody was like, nobody talks about emotion. Everybody's just very like, like, it is what it is. Like, we don't want to talk about it. And then people would then just pretend they don't have any emotion and act like, oh yeah, like I have no feelings, whatever. And that felt like it became a trend, in the sense of like, it wasn't even about people not necessarily acknowledging how they feel, but it was just because it looked cool. Celebrities did it, so on and so forth. And it was like almost like depression, anxiety, all that stuff became like almost like an accessory wear. And then going into now, I feel like it's still the depression, anxiety, I feel like is still kind of like an accessory wear, where people still kind of like do that. But then on the other side of the emotional aspect, I feel like now people are not necessarily as, like, not talking about their emotions too much. I think that they over talk about it to a point, not necessarily, I don't want to say talk about it, but they overindulge in their emotions to the point where they become more of a victim. So it's like they were either not acknowledging it at all and they were just kind of wrecking their life unknowingly, or they acknowledge it too much or dwell within it that they become a victim. So it's like, I want to talk about, where is that fine line of where you're, between victim and victor, based off of what you know.
Yeah, you're actually touching on something I'm kind of passionate about, man, because I'll try not to rabbit trail too far, but I'm just going to nerd out for a second, because if you look at our culture, if you look mental health and cultural tropes, just over time, culture swings back and forth. It reacts against itself. Historically, you can see that really consistently. You think, man, what we're living in right now is culture shift. It's swung hard in the last 30 years. So let's say back in the 80s, the emphasis wasn't on emotion. And even broadly speaking, even in the 90s, the emphasis was really on like the self-made man, which is there an intrinsic truth behind that? Of course, the intrinsic truth is the wisdom of personal responsibility, right? But that was the emphasis, and the emphasis or the perception of therapy was very negative, and the perception of trauma was like you're making excuses, blah, blah, blah. And then you see the shift in like the last 30 years, and I honestly hold mental health, the field kind of responsible for this, or at least in part, is that we swing far into the other, and now we abandon personal responsibility and we lean all into like social responsibility, which leads us to trauma has become trendy. And I think there's a good aspect to that. Like, trauma has now become part of the public discourse, which is great because people have a word to describe. And a byproduct of that, which I think is really toxic, is we've become as a culture wound identified instead of wound processed. So like you said it really well, you said an accessory. It becomes an identity. The things that I've gone through, the pain, the depression, the anxiety, the injustice that I've been through becomes my identity. And what you end up having is, so all trauma can be kind of conceptualized in one of three, or I should say specifically psycho-emotional trauma, because there's medical, physical trauma. In one of three branches, we have because they're wounds to our identity. Trauma is an external experience or adversity that I've internalized. And so when you see the victim mindset, what you're looking at is a loss of agency. And I think you can also, it'd be really easy to go into identity politics and talk about how that's been actually really exploited. And there's a narrative in our nation right now that says that young people, young adults literally don't have agency over their life, which is horrible. But identity politics aside, which is a great conversation in itself, say you have the wound of agency, which is God did not make us all powerful. We are not in control of our lives, but he gave us influence and agency. We can affect our life. The second of those three tiers is what I call the shame mindset. So that's the victim mindset. The shame mindset is the wound of worth, the wound of my own self-value. And then the last one being the anxiety mindset, which would be the wound of safety. So we can access those things. There are moments where we lose agency. That's true. There are moments where we are unsafe. And God designed our nervous system to have this incredible ability to tolerate moments of unsafety. Like I'm in a dark alley and now I have to react to a threat. The trauma, the anxious mindset is the threat has resolved and my nervous system is still in alarm state. It's still letting me know. It's like I'm looking for the next threat. And so one of the things that I think is mission critical is to first give the mindset a name. Is why am I not taking action in my life? Why am I not taking responsibility for my mental health, my personal like my career, my relationship, and to be able to name that. And I mean that word victim is such like a stigma. It's like a negative word. Nobody wants to identify as a victim. But if I feel powerless in my life, that is the traumatic mindset that I'm in.
That's good. Yeah, no, there's a lot that I really would like to go into. But one thing I like that you harped on was the fact that people kind of identify more with their trauma versus like process it, which is one of the biggest things that I feel like people do is they just identify, they take it and they just, this is who I am. And then they just do what's easy and then say that's mental health. Like, oh, I'm taking care of my mental health. I'm just going to stay in today because I don't want to go out and be with people because I'm going to take care of my mental health. But in reality, I feel like people don't know to then, they're part of like, moving in a healthy way is doing things that are uncomfortable. But I feel like people find comfort within their trauma and then say that their mental health is, being taken care of. And that's one of the things that I'm not like, I always notice within certain people where like, they're like, yeah, like I have issues with anxiety. I don't like being around people. So I'm going to just take care of myself today and just stay home. And it's like, yeah, I mean, although that's comfortable, but maybe if you really wanted to work through it, it's kind of like if you're, like I like to try to translate things into a physical standpoint because it's really hard to like really kind of like see things from a mental standpoint because it's not really necessarily like visible. You can't pinpoint it. You can't necessarily like say, hey, like this is what it looks like. But physically, like if you're at the gym, if you're just like, hey, like if you have diabetes, you're like, yeah, I'm going to take care of myself and just sit on the couch today and just eat, a couple donuts, it's like, and that's going to be taking care of my health. Like that would make no sense, but people do the same thing with mental health. And I feel like it's one of the issues that I feel a lot of people, especially within my generation, are kind of like going through because like you said, there is good from it because it's part of the conversation. People are talking about it, but then now they swing too far and then they just kind of then sit within the comfort of being a victim or being ashamed of themselves or all that stuff that you're saying, which then kind of goes into the next topic that I really want to talk about, which is, some people then try to take mental health within their own hands and they say, well, I'm going to just be on this road to self-help. And they just kind of go into, they read all these books, they try to digest all this stuff, and then they try to just make it work on their own. I've noticed that like for me that there's a really negative trend within that because I've done that. I've gone to a point where I saw my family has gone through certain things. I didn't want that for myself, whether it was relationally, financially. And then I was like, well, I'm going to make this work on my own. And I would buy all these books. I was digesting all this information. And then I would just really just try to work on myself, try to self-diagnose myself, like kind of like be like, okay, cool. Am I, super anxious? Am I super like let's say fearful about money? Like try to analyze myself in that area. But then I would just keep it to myself. And then I would only try to do that within my own mind, and I wouldn't try to bring it to anybody. And I feel like that's what for me has kind of became more of a toxic aspect of self-help, because it sets this bar of like, oh, you can do it on your own, you can figure it out. If you can't, then you're just like, less of a person. And then on top of that, like it keeps it within yourself, which is, I feel like, more of the dangerous aspect. Because I've had times in my life where I tried to there's certain things where I can just do on my own, where if I analyze a situation and I'm like, okay, cool, like how do I feel about this, like, and I can get through it. But sometimes when it's deeper trauma, I try to do the same exact thing, but then I overanalyze, and then I try to then, justify certain things, because I'm naturally I'm biased. I'm with myself. So then I just end up making no progress, or I make things worse. Yeah. And then on top of that, then I want to keep it to myself, and then I don't want to bring it to anybody. I don't want to like bring it to somebody who I trust, or somebody that like let's say is discipling me, or somebody who's mentoring me, or maybe even a therapist. Because of the self-help kind of almost builds like this like wall around
insulation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, you nailed it, man. Like you articulated so well. The problem isn't in reading books. The problem isn't in setting an intention to grow, or I want my family to be different. The problem is the isolation, right? The problem is the illusion that I can do this by myself. There's like a fundamental ground level truth that is just clear in my work every single day. Is we are wounded in relationship, and we only heal in relationship. You never find a mentor, a teacher. You never find the voice of God anywhere in God's word telling somebody to go handle something by themselves. Yeah. In fact, there's two fundamental forms of the most essential way that the brain heals. All brain healing, all emotional healing, all psychological healing, identity healing, it's all what we call, like on a neurological level, it's all integration. So I'm taking pieces of myself that have been disowned or divorced, and I'm reintegrating. That includes the good ideas and the bad ideas. The most essential mechanism in the brain for integration is verbal processing. It's talking. Because talking forces my left brain, which is language and logic, to interact with my right brain, which is experience and emotion. And I'm organizing that experience together. And so there's two basic forms of that in the Bible. Yeah. God says, in John teaches, confess to him, God, who is able to forgive and cleanse. So there's a spiritual healing that has to happen vertically. And then several times, one example is in James, confess your sins one to another. And that's actually the only time that it says, so that you might be healed. There's an interpersonal healing that has to take place. We're just not designed to create change. Yeah. We're mirroring, by being what we call, in the imago, in the image of God, we are mirror beings. We define ourselves through relationship. So I think you just named it really well. The problem isn't the intent or the desire to grow, buying great books. Books have changed my life. The problem is I'm going to clean this mess up, and then I'm going to go tell people, I'm going to let people see me. Yeah. Where the reality is, change, the most efficient, the most rapid, and the most exhaustive change comes from letting yourself be seen messy, having the experience of being good enough in that state, accepted, loved, challenged, and then changing. Change is a natural byproduct of agency, of feeling capable. And when we try and do it by ourselves, what we're telling ourselves, I will be good enough when I change. There's an implicit kind of like, we are practicing that. We're putting that into action when we say, I got this. Just give me a second. It's like one of the most, it comes up all the time when somebody in maybe a couple relationship has a hidden behavior, like maybe they struggle with pornography, and okay, I'm going to get 6 months under my belt, and then I'm going to tell my wife, like, oh, the problem with that is you're actually using the tool that got you into pornography, which is, I'm going to rely on myself. I'm not going to need you to meet my needs to try and get yourself out of pornography. It will never work. That's true. So you need to, it might not be your wife, but you need to go to somebody, be fully seen, be wrestled through the mud, let the all of these dysfunctional things in our life, they're meeting a need. They're serving a function. And so usually the reason those positive changes that we want to make don't last is because we're trying to take away a bad habit without understanding what function is that serving. Critical function, healthy function, is that thing serving? It's not doing it well. It's destroying me in the process, but it's serving a critical function. And how I'm going to meet that differently. And we, like you said, really, if I try and do that processing, I stay within my own understanding of the framework. So I stay limited to what I can see and what I can think.
No, that's good. And that kind of goes, especially with, I tell people all the time, whether it's my team or people that I disciple, is that you always want to have a community, because that's really what a community is, just broken up into just relationships. And within that, you want to have different levels of relationships. Do you have any insight on that? Like, what kind of relationship should you always have? Like, you should always have this type of person, and this type of person, somebody maybe mentoring you, maybe discipling you. Like, what are the levels of relationships you recommend to have like a healthy life?
Yeah, I definitely recommend being really, really intentional and saying, who are my mentors? And honestly, in my own thought life, I actually call them, who are my fathers right now? So I had a great dad. He had a lot of love to give me, and he had a lot of wonderful things to offer me. And there's a lot of skill sets he just didn't have. He doesn't see the world that way. He doesn't see himself that way. So I had to go, okay, I need other men to father me in these areas. So I have mentors that say, speak into my life when it comes to finances, speak into my life when it comes to business, making sure, because I get to work with a lot of leaders, making sure I have people in my life who are there to meet my needs. I'm not there to meet your needs. So I have my own therapist that I check in with. I have mentors that are friends, they're personal relationship, and there's a reciprocal gratification. I honor them, they honor me. But there's an understanding, you're ahead, and I go to you to seek wisdom. That's so critical for somebody who a lot of the people in my life come to me to help, for me to help them process. And so one of the exposures, one of the vulnerabilities of that is we lose the place. Where do I get totally seen? And if that's not you, also having a place, okay, one of the most powerful ways we take the wisdom and the mentorship that's offered to us, and we deepen those roots, is by playing that role in somebody else's life. I now have to embody it to teach you, to show you, to lead you. So both of those are really critical. And when it comes to just like on the most fundamental level, what is community? Community is a space where you just get to be you. You get to be on mission. You get to enjoy your life. You get to have fun. You get to be known by other people. So I tell couples all the time, a marriage that's composed of two people is a marriage in isolation. A marriage is not designed to be limited to those two people. They need mentors, but they also just need people that they're shoulder to shoulder with. Like one of the most kind of life-giving things that a couple that's going through a struggle can have is they sit down and they finally tell somebody else about what they're going through, and they'll hear the other couple say, "Oh, me too." Like, oh, okay. So we're not broken. We're not hopeless. This didn't happen to us because like we're different somehow. Everybody goes through this. And then like literally the nature of the problem changes when you realize I'm not in this alone.
It's true.
So it's not very concrete. It's not very specific, but making sure I have any area where I want to excel. Like I know who the three men are in my life because entrepreneurial, that kind of ambitious drive, business, it's something I love, but it's not what I've spent my life developing myself in. I've spent my life developing myself interpersonal, clinical skills. And so I know the men that I go to that are going to challenge me and say, why can't you do this 2-year plan in 6 months, Brian? Or what's stopping you from dreaming bigger? Or why haven't you taken action on this yet? Like I know who those guys are. So definitely an area where you know you want to grow, have specific covering.
No, that's good. What would you say would be the difference between having a mentor in your life that's somebody, that's like a father figure, gives you advice, pushes you, has you grow, versus maybe having a therapist? What would you say are the pros and cons, or maybe like how do they play a part with each other within this aspect?
That's so good, man. Therapy is a really specific and unique space. Therapy is a space that's set apart from my life. So I really think about therapy, and I encourage clients that I work with, I want you to think about this office and my voice as an extension of your internal world. So when I have a mentor, it is my internal world coming into contact with somebody else's. And I have to remain aware that you have your own opinions, your own agenda, your hopes for me, you love me, your wants for me, all those things. So I have to remain separate from you. And I have to know that there's going to be a ripple effect. So if I share with you, oh man, I'm really struggling with something, and you idealize me, and I disappoint you, that might have a ripple effect in my life. I have to know that I'm aware of that. And so it impacts the way I move into that space. Therapy is set apart in that it's a professional relationship, even though it's intensely personal, right? Like it's as intimate as you can get. It's professional, which means at the end of the day, part of my job as a person's therapist is to not have any expectations of you. I'm never going to be disappointed in my client. You can't disappoint me. I can be frustrated with you. I can be, I will, of course, I'll have my own personal experience in the therapy process if somebody's struggling or somebody's behaving in a way that's self-destructive or whatever. But a therapist is a highly trained person to say, I'm actually going to remove what we call projection. I'm going to remove my personal agenda from this, and I'm going to hold space to just reflect back so I can see myself in a mirror honestly, which is why, I will always have my own personal therapist. My personal therapist is a guy actually, he used to be in Southern California. He's moved to Colorado. We jump on Zoom together. His name is Dr. Brooks. He's a great guy. But I pay Dr. Brooks not to be my friend. He's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
Like we have a great relationship. We laugh together. We know things about each other's life. But at the end of the day, when we jump on that Zoom call, Brian is the subject. Dr. Brooks is not the subject. And that's that space. So if there's something coming up in my life where I'm like, there's nobody I want to tell. And I respect Dr. Brooks. I got a great relationship. I definitely don't want to tell him. All right, that is a space. I'm always going to bring it there. I'm going to air it out. I'm going to test the ground there. Or if I'm stuck in like a destructive cycle, it also becomes a place where obviously somebody who studies the brain and mental health and emotional dynamics and relational dynamics and psychological realities is that I can also say, here's what I see happening, right? I can give you an external, but to the greatest degree possible, I'm going to remove Brian. And I'm going to say, let's just look at this honestly. Because the reality is when we accept reality, we start to change. When a lot of times we think we're accepting reality, but really we're moving into shame through that reality. Like I might say, well, I'm confessing to you that I'm stuck in some sin or I'm stuck in some destructive behavior. But I actually haven't accepted reality. What I've done is I've internalized something that I feel really bad about. And now I'm going to you as a way of embodying that shame.
Yeah.
A therapist is going to say, okay, let's get curious about what's going on underneath. Why is that happening? Because if this bothers you, then we know that behavior is out of alignment with your identity and your values, or it wouldn't bother you. So let's get curious about where it's coming from. I will also challenge you. I'll also equip you and give you guidance and tools on how to take active steps out of it. So we don't want to stay there, but so often change relapses. It recidivates because we're trying to take away something that our nervous system or our limbic brain is using essentially on a survival level, right, to meet emotional needs or to meet identity needs. We're taking it away and say, okay, well, I can do that for a minute. I can do it for a couple of weeks, but it's not sustainable.
Yeah, no, that's true. You did that. You actually really explained that very well because a lot of people kind of tend to not know the difference a lot. I feel like, and also I feel like therapy kind of has this weird stigma around it. And now it's starting to get to a better light. I feel like as we start to progress within our culture. But do you think that therapy is for everybody? And if it is, why? Or if it's not, then why not?
Yeah, I would definitely the short answer to that question is therapy is for everybody. Like I said before. At its most essential, therapy is just a set-apart space where I can be totally stripped down, and I can process anything. And one of the tenets on a legal level, one of the tenets of therapy is that it's confidential. I will be fined, I'll lose my license, and potentially be subject to jail time if I share somebody's private information. And I think that's really powerful because that's where it creates that space that Brian really isn't a relationship I'm trying to build in my life. Do I need to trust Brian? Of course I do. Brian is really an extension of my internal world. And so I don't think that everybody should go to therapy, but therapy is a good option for everybody. I honestly say let the pain lead you. So if you're like firing on all cylinders, everything is great, your marriage is really fulfilling, and they reflect that back to you in your work life. If you're doing really well, don't think, well, therapy is really popular, I should go check in. Mm-hmm. Well, because the first thing the therapist is going to ask you, what are your goals here? Like, why are you here?
Yeah.
But if you think there's something that would be helpful to process, or you're processing it with other people and you're not seeing the breakthrough, you're not seeing the kind of rapid integration or progress you want, absolutely, it's for everybody.
Yeah, that's good. What would you say would be a good, like, if there's like a checklist or maybe a protocol of how someone should go about finding a therapist? I know that, some people would just be like, well, let me see if my insurance takes this person, and they just kind of take whoever is given to them. Or should they kind of vet their therapist? Should they ask therapists questions? If so, what questions should they ask?
Yeah, I had one of my favorite mentors, a professor, in my first graduate program. She'd say, Brian, in San Diego, because San Diego is one of the most saturated markets for private practice therapists. It has the highest per capita of therapists. Brian, in San Diego, you cannot throw a stone without hitting a therapist, but
that's pretty cool.
You can throw 100 and never hit a good one. So what I'm basically saying is that I never just go blind to a therapist's office, because you just never know what you're going to get. Is that counselor, is that professional therapist well processed? Do they know their stuff? Are they processed? A couple of guide points that I always recommend. First and foremost, above everything else, always seek out specialized care, because oftentimes you'll look up a therapist's CV, or you'll look up their website, and they'll list like 30 things that they specialize in. You're like, okay, that means you're not specialized in anything. So I'm highly specialized. I work with couples and I work with leaders. So the areas of training are what we call trauma work, compulsive neuroscience, so like neuroscience, and adult attachment. So if a family comes in, a teen comes in, a child comes in, somebody comes in, say, oh, I'm feeling depressed. Somebody comes in and says, I have anxiety. I say, awesome. Let me send you to somebody who just lives and breathes anxiety, or lives and breathes depression. That's the first. Go to somebody who knows, because their breadth of knowledge, the experiences of, oh, this didn't work and this did work, is going to be so much broader with that need when they live and breathe that all the time. That's true. Certainly what I'm constantly, every year, I'm doing new trainings on adult attachments. I'm obsessed with it. So that's number one, is go to somebody specialized. Okay. Number two is, if possible, get a referral. Because more than likely, if you get a referral, it's because that person made a positive impact on the person you're getting the referral from. And there are just so many therapists who people get into therapy as a profession because usually for really good reasons. They want to help people. They have good interpersonal empathic skills. But generally speaking, not because they have not often because, I've got like a really specific vision for what I'm doing here. And it was actually something that was reflected back to me towards the end of my graduate school. The first private practice job that was offered to me was, I was talking to one of my professors at my graduate program, and she said, Brian, do you have any idea what you want to do? Is like, I want to work with couples in crisis, because I am only sitting in this classroom because I almost shipwrecked my marriage, and therapy transformed it. Not only did it save my marriage, but my marriage went from a 5 before the crisis to a 10 after the crisis. Therapy and God helped me go through that process. And so just realizing, that's actually not normal. Most therapists don't have this really clear, passionate vision. So you just get a lot of people who are just kind of like, they're great, they mean well, but they're not like passionate learners, growers, developers. And so go for a referral, go for specialized.
That's good. Yeah, no, it definitely helps. Because I feel like it's also like one of those things too, where it's like you don't really know where to go to ask somebody how to look for a therapist either. So that really helps a lot. And that kind of goes into what I wanted to talk about next, was just you said you specialize in marriages, family, and leaders, right? Specifically,
not family systems. So if a family comes in, I'm going to send you to somebody who works with systems. I work with couple relationships and individuals. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then so I know you said you worked with couples because of what you said that you
Yeah.
went through, but leaders interested on why that's the case for leaders. Is that something that came down the line? Is that something that you've always wanted to do? How come you're like mainly working with leaders now?
Yeah, it was like it almost feels like it happened to me. Then once I started to notice it happening, I leaned into it because I love it so much. But and I would honestly go back like, why did I enter therapy with the posture that I had? So I had a very clear vision of who I wanted to help. I did not have a clear vision of the level of the caliber of person or the level of the type of personality. I was just like, I know that I want to help people have amazing marriages. And so I just got obsessed in the beginning of my career. I learned everything I could. If there was a training on couples work, I went and I did it. And I just put my head in this hole of just learning and developing myself. I wanted to be the best couples therapist in the world. And I just got obsessed with that. And so like maybe 5 or 6 years into that, you know, when you live that way,
Yeah.
you very, very slowly gain mastery over something.
Yeah, that's true.
And I was so focused on myself, I didn't have like a point of reference and I didn't have a comparison or anything. And a really amazing guy who's, I would credit them with kind of changing my life. Dr. Matt and Michaela Hubbard were clients of mine many years ago. And they came in and they had been to many couples therapists. And Dr. Matt started reflecting to me, and Brian, like the way you work is different than other people. And because of him, he started to open up doorways, and I started to work with more and more entrepreneurial, pastoral leaders, high-level people. And I started to realize, like, there is, not only do I love working with that personality, but there's a piece of that which I've never had the courage to own in myself. There's a piece of that, like speaking from a platform. There's a piece of the leadership that I've always wanted, and I've always believed was in me, but I never had the courage to face it. And so that turned into, in the last like 6 years, I've really been pursuing performance psychology. And so I have this unbelievable gift, like this privilege to like work with really high level people. I can't remember what your question was.
No, why you kind of started going into working with high-level people. So you answered that pretty well. So then doing that, like, have you noticed any type of difference within, you know, the way you operate? Is that something that you've kind of noticed where it's like, oh, like, because I know that, especially because I do the same. I work with high-level people as well. It kind of pushes me to learn more or even to really see the way they think. And just really curious to see on your thoughts on how that has been for you.
Yeah, you and I were talking real briefly before we sat down, and you were kind of reflecting on how getting to work with such high level people develops you, and that's so true for me. As I'm supporting people and we're processing and we're doing their work, I am learning how they think, and I'm paying attention. Oh, interesting. I think differently, and I didn't invent that way of thinking. I adopted that way of thinking from a parent or a friend or the context or my community or whatever, and so what that's, I think, developed in me is I've learned to support that person even better over the years, where it's like if you go into most kind of couples trainings, what they're going to do is they're going to direct you to lean directly into relational and emotional dynamics, which is a critical, I would not say it's the critical piece of creating relationship change. But what I've learned getting to work with like leaders and entrepreneurs is that the more I can create context for why I'm guiding you in there, the more I'm going to empower you to do that rapidly. And so things that I've learned to do over time and it's just become my style is I integrate a lot of neuroscience and I integrate a lot of context. I'm going to tell you, okay, why did that just happen? Why did she just respond to you with that tone? Why did you just shut down when she said that thing? We're talking about what's happening in the nervous system, which creates this context for me to say, okay, because I know why I want to shut down, I can resist it. I can actually act against this impulse.
That's true.
And I can take a risk that otherwise everything in my body is telling me to shut down. So what it's done is it's just kind of helped me find, oh, this is what my voice in that room looks like and sounds like. Yeah.
That's really cool. And I think also this is one of my theories in the aspect of why people kind of gravitate towards you leadership wise is a lot of your the way you go about things is very biblical based. And I think that naturally as a culture, everybody gravitates towards biblical principles, whether they know it or not. You know, people like love, you know, the law of attraction. They love all these things of like, you know, be good to your neighbor, and all this stuff is biblical originally from the Bible, and some people take it, remix it, and then just remove God out of it, call it the universe or whatever. And then people still gravitate towards it because it's just, a principle is a principle of God. And I feel like because you do that, people and leaders gravitate towards you. And it's the reason why I mainly gravitate towards you, because I know a lot of therapists, and they're great and they're well articulated, but it's the way you intricate the biblical principles very clearly, and it really helps understand things even better. I feel like more from an emotional standpoint, because I love the science of it. I love the understanding the way the brain works. That helps me as well. But I feel like the biblical aspect really is where the emotional kind of ties into it. But my question is, why do you do that? Like, why is that something that you've attended? Is it natural to you? Is it something that you're like, this is just the way that I just need to teach people? Like, why do you do that?
I think what's kind of come to is, and I got really fortunate. I was offered spaces to develop as a teacher in places where that was welcome. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I teach what excites me. I teach what interests me. I teach what feels empowering and liberating to me. So when you hear me teach on a topic, you're not just going to hear me say, here are 3 steps that I think would be helpful. You're always going to hear me giving context. Why? Because that's how I think. I need to know why this is happening. Yeah. If you want me to take action, or what faith do I have in that action? And so I think the biblical integration, because that just wakes me up. It sets me up, like, to see something I'm learning in clinical psychology, and to be able to see how that's an echo of a truth that God taught us thousands of years ago. It just lights me up, and it gives it deepens my trust in the clinical work. Yeah. And in a kind of strange way, it almost deepens my trust in God's word. But ultimately, the reason I do it is because I think God designed our hearts. He designed our nervous system. When you go into the clinical world, when you go into mental health, one of the things you're going to learn really quickly is they're very, very inviting to vague, indefined spirituality. Spiritual is good, but they are not welcoming to the Christian faith. The Christian faith in and of itself is not something that's considered, I don't know what the word would be, credible. And so it's fascinating to me to see, well, man, all the best ideas that have emerged from clinical psychology in the last 60 years, which is when it's been most active, you can find all of the most effective ideas. They are all echoed in God's word. Clinical psychologists and research psychologists, they just love to name it something and say, we discovered something brand new. It's like, no, you did it. But good for you. You've turned it into a protocol that we can use. I think I'm bunny training a little bit, but ultimately I do it, I think, probably out of selfish, because it motivates and orients me. It helps me feel like this, knowing that this is actually resonant, that this is in alignment with God's truth. Because at the end of the day, therapy was helpful, mentors were helpful, but the thing that changed my life at the end of the day, 15 years ago, was the fact that I had a radical experience of God's love that changed the way I thought about myself. And so anything that's out of alignment with that experience, ultimately at the end of the day, I'm going to hold with great suspicion. So, yeah. Okay,
that makes a lot of sense, to be honest. I feel like what and we'll end here in a little bit, but what would be a few things that you think are one of those echoes? Because especially when you you did a message talking about the difference between happiness and joy. I think that's extremely I feel like crucial within our culture, because everybody's always like, oh, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? And everybody always says happy, but that was a great thing that was echoed through the Bible. But for you, is there anything else that you feel like, that you would want to leave off on that's echoed through the Bible that people can take and, put in their pocket and hopefully use?
I mean, something that's come up in our conversation today is you brought up this observation that we are in a cultural moment where the pendulum is swung hard into this kind of social consciousness and this kind of trauma awareness, which has led to pervasive self-imposed. It's what I call wound identified. It's very victim mindset. And you think, okay, is there something that I could actually, I could say, I could ground this in a way that empowers me in the Word of God. And something you see again and again and again in God's Word is that transformation, being restored to who God actually created us to be, is always the balance of grace and truth together. The New Testament says that that Christ was actually the embodiment. He is grace and truth together made whole. And what we tend to err on, and you can go into different churches and see this, right? You can go into a super woke church, it's all grace, no truth. You can go into a super rigid religious church, it's all truth and no grace. I think what we're, and honestly, it helps me kind of orient in like a valid foundation to the cultural thing that's happening. Okay, there's a part of me that resonates when I hear about social justice. Of course that matters. Of course validating your pain is legitimate. Of course validating forms of oppression that exist. Of course that's important. Why does this feel so destructive? Oh, because we're not coupling it with integration. We're not coupling it with truth. We're not saying, okay, yes, this happened to you. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Are you going to let this define your identity? There's no truth. And so that would be just an example where we see where Christ becomes the embodiment of grace and truth. And so if you notice yourself, like, man, there's pieces of this cultural movement that I actually feel really critical to me, but it feels out of balance. Well, maybe you're reading it just right. So the question becomes, how do I bring the agency and the truth of who God created me? How do I bring it to the validation? I don't want to stay in the wound. I want to move from the wound back. I want to be restored back into what God, which is my image. The image of God in me is an image of agency. I have power. An image of worth. I am valuable beyond words. And an image of safety. When I am safe, I am able to reassure myself that I'm safe. So, yeah.
That's good. I love how you bring that up, because that's one of the leadership skills that I always tell my team, is that whenever we're leading somebody, you always want to, especially with confrontation, you want to just be fully, transparent, but also have grace and truth both aligned. Because too much grace and they'll do it again. Too much truth and then you just might push them away. So, man, I definitely appreciate you being on this podcast. I'm going to have you look into this camera and let people know where they can find you on Instagram, whatever website you have. And that way people can connect with you.
Thank you so much, man. It's been such an honor. You got people who want to be able to follow and get in touch with me. Our website is right now being completely rebuilt, so that's not live, but you can always find us on Brian REISWIG Therapy on Instagram, at Brian REISWIG Therapy, and feel free to contact our office, which is 619-800-5295. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks again, man. I really appreciate you. It's really an honor. This was a great conversation. It was one of my favorites, to be honest. And then hopefully, we'll be able to have you back on here again.
That'd be fantastic, man. It's been so much fun. Thank you.